you like to get us started today?
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, everyone. My name is Katie Pratt. I'm the Executive Director with the Environmental Quality Board, and I'm just checking my team to make sure we're recording this session. Looks like the recording is going. Anyway, good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. On behalf of the Environmental Quality Board, I'd like to welcome you to the speaker series. As you probably know, the Environmental Quality Board is currently working on a pilot program for integrating climate assessment into environmental review. And this speaker series is intended to bring technical experts forward who can share information and their knowledge about how we do this work. And so this is the first of a speaker series that will hold approximately monthly in the coming months. And each topic is designed to, again, give you information that hopefully will be helpful in your work. So the whole team here at EQB and our environmental review staff have been putting together topics that they think will be useful in bringing technical experts forward. We love your input and ideas that you might have on the speaker series as well, so feel free to reach out to us. And we also hope that these speaker series is a chance for conversation and discussion and questions from all of you as well. So again, thank you for being here this morning. And with that, I'll turn it over to Yasmin Robinson, who will walk you through the program for today.
Great, thank you so much. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Yasmin Robinson. I am the Environmental Review Program Administrator here at the Environmental Quality Board. And today we're going to kick off, as Executive Director Pratt mentioned, the first in the Climate Change and Environmental Review pilot speaker series. And directly following today, registered participants, RGUs, will gather also for the first cohort meeting. At the end of the presentation today, there will be time for questions, but if you are a cohort member, feel free to save your questions for the cohort meeting. And also just a reminder, we are recording the session today and it will be posted on the EQB website. And just a little bit of background, which you've gotten a little bit of a taste of. Through 2022, EQB will be holding a speaker series event, cohort meetings, and sending out surveys in support of the Climate Change and Environmental Review pilot. So stay tuned for March, where we will have a presentation about the Minnesota Department of Transportation's Infrastructure Carbon Estimator tool. And so you should see some emails going out about that starting next week. And if you have any suggestions for future events, please let us know. I will put my email address in the chat today so you can get in contact with me directly. So today I'm really excited to introduce our speakers, Alison Siracos and Rachael Shetka from Barr Engineering. So I'm going to hand the controls over to you, Allison and Rachael. Oh, I think you're muted. There you go.
All right, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Rachael Shetka with Barr Engineering. In the Duluth office. I have over 20 years of experience doing environmental review and permitting projects, both in consulting and private industry. And my background is a Bachelor of Chemical Engineering from the University of Minnesota. Allison introduced herself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alison Siracos, and I am an environmental scientist at Barr Engineering. I have helped with numerous greenhouse gas assessments at Barr Engineering, and then also helped with developing the technical assessment for the pilot program. I have a master's in land and atmospheric science from the University of Minnesota.
All right, thanks, Allison. Allison will be presenting the majority of our slides today, but before she brings those up on the screen, I just wanted to provide a little bit of background on our technical assessment and the example that we'll walk through today. We prepared the technical assessment last May on behalf of the EQB and the Interagency Technical Review Committee. So we selected a couple different project types to prepare a full greenhouse gas assessment. Today we'll only be talking about the industrial, commercial, and institutional category. That's 14. The example we'll walk through is a hospital. We also prepared an assessment as an example for animal feedlots. We won't be walking through that today, but the full technical assessment is available on the EQB's website that details those calculations. We did select the institutional, commercial, and industrial category to highlight an example where we would have emissions coming from multiple sources and categories, as well as capturing different project types that are happening across the spectrum in Minnesota. And so with that, I will turn it over to Allison, and we'll be available to answer questions at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, so for the remainder of this presentation, what I'm planning to do is just walk through kind of a high-level overview of what is in the guidance document related to developing a carbon footprint, and then get into the example that Rachael mentioned about the hospital redevelopment that we assessed for the technical assessment. So the majority of what I have in this presentation is directly from the guidance document. So if there's anything in here that you want to gather more details about, definitely use the guidance document for that. So there are 5 steps that are outlined in the guidance document for developing a carbon footprint. First is to identify the sources of your greenhouse gas emissions. Second is to identify the types of greenhouse gas emissions that are emitted. The third step is reporting greenhouse gas emissions, and then the fourth is quantifying your greenhouse gas emissions, and then lastly, identifying and assessing mitigation measures. Okay, so step 1 for identifying greenhouse gas emissions. I really like this graphic from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. It really outlines, I think it does a really good job outlining the different sources of greenhouse gas emissions. And the Greenhouse Gas Protocol is a global agency or organization that the EPA adopts for assessing greenhouse gas emissions. And they break out sources between direct and indirect emissions, where direct being your Scope 1 emissions, as outlined here in the green, as all of your emissions that are directly from the reporting facility. So stationary combustion sources from process units, but then also mobile sources from company-owned vehicles. All of your indirect sources, they break out into Scope 2 and Scope 3, where Scope 2 is all of your indirect sources from electricity and energy consumption. And then Scope 3 is pretty much everything else that's upstream and downstream of the project or the reporting company. And so that can be greenhouse gas emissions from purchased goods and services, from raw material development, from transportation of those raw materials to your facility, and then downstream activities can be transportation of the product, the processing of the sold product, use of the product, the end of life use of the product. So this table here is directly out of the guidance document, and it outlines the different emission sources that the guidance document recommends. So the direct emissions and indirect emissions the direct emissions under Scope 1 for combustion and non-combustion sources related to operations and construction. Again, both outlining the emission subtypes for stationary and mobile sources, and then also for construction for land use change. And then the indirect emissions for Scope 2 for operations, for off-site electricity and energy consumption, and then also Scope 3 emissions for off-site waste management. And not all of the projects necessarily will have each one of these types of sources. For example, a stream restoration project may only have construction sources from mobile source combustion, whereas the hospital redevelopment example that we're going to talk about today does have more stationary combustion, mobile sources, and then the indirect sources as well. So step 2, identifying the types of greenhouse gases emitted. So there are 3 common greenhouse gases that are reported, and those are carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane. There are a number of other fluorinated gases and hydrocarbons that may be sources, and those are definitely outlined more in the guidance document, but these are the main 3 that are included in typical reporting. So how to report greenhouse gas emissions. Greenhouse gas emissions are reported on an annual average basis. The guidance document suggests reporting both construction and operation phases, but not in decommissioning phases. And then the units are tons of carbon dioxide equivalents, or CO2e, per year. And you calculate that using the global warming potentials for each of the pollutants. So table 2 here, again, this is out right from the guidance document, outlines the different greenhouse gases and their associated global warming potentials. And what this is basically a ranking system for each greenhouse gas that's relative to carbon dioxide based off of their greenhouse gas properties and their residence time within the atmosphere. So carbon dioxide, like I said, has a global warming potential of 1, and for example, methane has a global warming potential of 25, meaning that it's 25 times stronger greenhouse gas compared to carbon dioxide. And so we report greenhouse gas emissions in carbon dioxide equivalents to get a total amount of greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, step 4, how to quantify greenhouse gas emissions. So there are simplified methods for calculating greenhouse gas emissions that do take linear equations that involve emission factors and activity factors. The EPA's Center for Corporate Climate Leadership provides easy-to-use emission factors for creating greenhouse gas inventories, and I like to think of this as kind of the cheat sheet of emission factors for greenhouse gas accounting. In their greenhouse gas emission factor hub, this is a screenshot of what the emission factor hub looks like. It's several tables of different emission and activity factors that are user-friendly. And here's an example of a calculation for carbon dioxide emissions from mobile source combustion, where we have the fuel in physical units and then times the carbon dioxide emission factor, which is kilograms of carbon dioxide per the physical unit of fuel use, and then times the conversion unit of kilograms to tons. And if we were calculating, let's say, nitrous oxide instead of carbon dioxide, then we would multiply by the global warming potential, which would be 298. I wanted to touch on two calculating emissions from indirect oxide energy sources. So specifically, I wanted to highlight calculating based on electricity sources, and the EPA suggests using the eGrid, the EPA's Emissions and Generation Resource Integrated Database. And this is a snapshot here, an image of their subregions. They break out emission factors by subregions, by state, and also by facility, depending on the knowledge that you have of where your electricity might be coming from. Again, these emission factors are laid out in the EPA's Emission Factor Hub, along with the other off-site energy consumptions, such as steam and heat. I did provide here an example calculation of how you would calculate greenhouse gas emissions from purchased electricity. So you take your purchased electricity consumption in megawatt hours and then times the emission factor, which is pounds of CO2 or the greenhouse gas pollutant per megawatt hour, and then times the respective global warming potential value. And here are some pre-existing tools that are outlined within the guidance document. This is not, an exhaustive list. There are definitely more tools out there, but these are just some examples of tools that have been developed to help with some specific project types. Some projects might have more detailed emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, and there were tools developed to help with calculating those. For example, the MPCA feedlot tool is a great tool for calculating greenhouse gas emissions from manure storage and treatment and manure land application. There are a few farming-based tools, waste management tools, and the MICE tool as well for highway combustion sources. And again, these are all outlined in the guidance document as well. And then finally, step 5, after you've calculated your greenhouse gas emissions for each of the direct and indirect and the various project phases, it's then easier to assess and to determine how you might apply some mitigation measures for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And here's a list of just common measures that, again, is in the guidance document for things such as energy efficiency or alternative fuels, things like that. Okay, so now I'm going to move into the project example that Rachael mentioned. So we've looked at a hospital redevelopment project under the EAW Subpart 14 category for industrial, commercial, and institutional facilities. Our key assumptions for this project include that the proposed project would be constructed and operated in an urban and developed setting, that there would be no land use change related to the project. The construction phase would anticipate to last for 36 months. The total project area is 34 acres with a multi-story tower of 920,000 square feet for a total of just over 2.4 million square feet. The proposed project would add 250 hospital beds to the existing 139 beds for a total of 389 bed facility. And the facility would implement waste best management practices and to recycle and compost appropriate material when applicable. And the lifetime of the project is 50 years. So here's a summary table of the greenhouse gas emissions from this project, and this is mirrored off of the table that is in the guidance document, where it's broken out between direct and indirect emissions, and then sub-broke out between operations and construction, and then further for stationary combustion and mobile sources. So under the direct emissions, you can see that we had a few stationary combustion sources, and with varying fuel types, as well as some mobile sources, and then the construction mobile sources. And under the indirect emissions, we have broken out between the off-site electricity consumption and then the off-site waste from various sources, from the landfill, recycling, combustion, and then the compost. So I'm going to go through, just kind of highlight some of these in detail. So first, looking at the stationary combustion sources, here are the calculations that I did, and the green highlighted cells are the data inputs, and then the values that are under the orange columns are the emission factors that are from the EPA emission factor hub. And so basically, it's just following the linear equation that I outlined before to get the emissions, and then to apply the global warming potential value to get the CO2e. Here are the calculations for the mobile source combustion. This one here, again, follows that same outline where I broke it out between operational mobile source combustions by the different fuel types, and then also the construction mobile sources. And again, the green cells are the data inputs. And then I wanted to just highlight here that a lot of the vehicle types to include are directly from the EPA emission factor hub. So these two tables here are from that emission factor hub, where it really it outlines the different vehicle types, and then the fuel type, and then what factor would be most appropriate. So I outlined here in blue for the construction equipment for the non-road vehicles that are more for backhoes and things like that. And then the on-road diesel fuels for choosing the light-duty trucks and heavy-duty vehicles here as well. And then here's a table of the indirect greenhouse gas emissions. On the top row is for the off-site electricity, which is based off of the MROW, or the MRO West subregion, based off of the graphic that I showed earlier. And again, those emission factors are pulled directly from the EPA emission factor hub. And then the various waste management. So waste going to landfill, the recycled, the medical and hazardous waste combustion, food waste, both in compost and landfill. Okay, well, that concludes a portion of my presentation, and I will hand it over back to Yasmin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Allison and Rachel. That was really interesting information. And let me see, I'm gonna share my screen here so that if you are not familiar with how to ask a question in WebEx, or if you need a quick refresher, start that off. So if you're not super familiar with WebEx, you can find your name in the participants list in the lower left-hand corner. And then you can click your name, and there should be a little hand there where that you can click, and your hand should raise, and you should also be able to lower your hand with that same icon. So I'll leave this up for a second in case people need to make sure that they can find that. Great. So if you have any questions for Allison and Rachel about the information that they've given us today, please raise your hand. And it looks like we've got a question here from Jeff Broberg. Jeff, you should be unmuted. Jeff, are you there? All right, bear with us, folks. I'm going to try to get the Q&A session started here soon. Thank you. All right, Jeff, try again. You should be unmuted now. Oh, was that you?
I'm sorry, I was just trying out the method. I didn't mean to raise my
Oh,
hand.
it's okay. We can go to the next person.
I'm sorry for the
No
confusion.
problem. Lori Cox, you should be unmuted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. I just wanted to go back to the first slide actually that I saw. So in the GHG protocol that you first showed, agriculture, I think, rarely provides a full GHG emissions picture to include all the scopes, not only tillage, but inputs, manufacture, trucking, transport, delivery, harvest, tillage again, transport overseas, transport again, and finally use. What could be done, I guess, to provide a more honest picture of row crop, biofuels, feedlots, large scale ag, like you showed with that type of facility analysis? And sometimes I also see that in the mining sector. Thank you.
Great question.
Yasmin, is it okay if I lean in to answer that question a little bit?
Sure, go ahead.
Lori, those are some of the things that we hope to learn out of the pilot program as folks go through the process, as they do the assessments. We'll be watching that and working with folks to try to determine if there are more sector-specific guidance documents that might be helpful or needed, and then work to going forward to help produce those guidance documents.
And looks like we have also Lucas Sjostrom. Lucas, you can unmute yourself.
I didn't know how this comment period was working. So Denise, I sent you an email with these same comments just now, which you probably saw. But one of our concerns for the past 20 years, and now IPCC has kind of verified it, is that enteric methane, that through the digestive process that is in the carbon cycle, will, first of all, has less impact on the planet, but also if we target that and mitigate it, will have less benefit if we have less of that enteric methane. And so I agree and believe that methane times 25 normal carbon dioxide is completely accurate. But I think if you look at the recent IPCC report, they basically state that we think our methane numbers are way off, and that from agriculture is probably overstated by 3 to 4 times, and that from other sources is understated by 4 to 5 times. And so, again, I think what you're talking about in the pilot program is not going to flesh that out unless we, state that up front. And that's really important because it would, first of all, put different types of projects into and out of the scoping of this requirement in the first place. And second of all, if you put them in, it would overstate or understate depending on what type of methane would even be impacting, or if we mitigated it, benefiting warming. So I just wanted to state that I think we need to be careful just saying methane's 25 times, because we've stated for 20 years without any backing, and finally in August of last year, IPCC agreed and said, yep, these are 2 different types of methane cycles. So I hope that can be incorporated going forward.
Thank you, Lucas. That's your points are well taken and will be considered.
All right, next we have Nick Martin. Nick, you can unmute.
So I have a suggestion, just also first to disclose, I'm on the EQB. So I've had a lot of chance to think about this project. But I did want to mention or make one suggestion to the point that Allison was making around the use of eGrid for electricity emission factors. eGrid is a great resource, in general, and I understand why they use it in the emission factor hub. But it is what eGrid reflects, put together by EPA, is large regions of the grid, not utility-specific data, and also sort of where the grid was a couple of years ago, because it always takes EPA a couple of years to release that data. And I think that that will tend to exaggerate the emissions from electricity use relative to if there were an option for a particular project to use utility-specific greenhouse gas emission factors where those are available. Maybe eGrid would be a fallback where those aren't available. But just to give an example of that, I think in Allison's hospital example, the emissions from electricity use are were 2/3 or something of the total, and were calculated based on an eGrid factor of about 1,000 pounds per megawatt hour for electricity. And if that hospital knew which utility service territory it's in and could get utility specific data, that would likely be significantly lower carbon, because most Minnesota utilities have put more renewable energy on the system and so on than the grid region as a whole. So so my suggestion is just to to have the guidance perhaps provide an option of utility specific emission factors. eGrid could still be a fallback option, because there will be projects maybe where cited in utility service territories where utilities don't provide that data.
Thanks for that comment, Nick. And I just for all the participants, just to let you know that the guidance was developed sort of as a broad brush, right, to apply to a lot of different project types that are identified in the mandatory categories that undergo review. And they identify resources and tools, but the guidance does not prevent an individual RGU from making a determination on the types of assessment, what emission factors are used, and the most relevant, in using the most relevant information available for that specific project type. And so to your point, Nick, that discretion is anticipated in the way the guidance was developed and the way that the questions were formed.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it could be useful still to have the guidance point to this as an option so that the
Sure.
RGU would know, they have discretion to allow a project to use a utility specific factor if that's available. Thanks a lot, Denise.
Thanks, Nick. Next, we have Jeff Broberg. Jeff, you can unmute.
Thank you. I'm sorry for the earlier confusion. I do have a question, and it kind of twofold. One is EAWs are done at a lot of different stages of development, and everything from a concept sewer extension, for example, saying you're going to urbanize a section of Winona, right down to final permit approval on a facility where you might know all of the details about this. Can you maybe shed some light on how we deal with those things, especially the uncertainty in the early phases of the work, and whether there's a need to update this data as you get more details? Thank you.
Hi, Jeff. So I'm trying to think, your question, maybe you could add a little bit more clarity. Yes, environmental review is done for all different project types. And so based on that specific project type, different types of analysis might be more relevant. And so we do anticipate the need for sort of updating this guidance on a recurring basis with the most recent tools and resources available. And your point is well taken.
Thank you. I think we do have a few questions in the chat here. So Marty, do you want to read a chat question?
Yes, we have a question in the chat that says, how are changes to soil carbon storage being captured, such as removing perennial vegetation like prairie and/or filling and draining wetlands?
So I think that's kind of a project specific, sector specific technical assessment. And so that would, I think, require a lot more background to be able to respond to that question in a meaningful way. So I'm going to ask whoever is raising that question to get a hold of me, and we can kind of talk through that. And again, I just want to reiterate that the purpose of this, of environmental review documents, they're information documents, and they, especially the EAW form, uses readily available information to do that kind of assessment and provide that, provide that usable information, project proposers, members of the public, and government decision makers. And so, but the details of the analysis sometimes are very project specific based on the nature and location of that project. And so we're here to offer technical assistance as you go through that process. Feel free to reach out to us as you go through the guidance. If you have specific questions, we can put you into contact with some technical resources that might help you sort of navigate what might be required for an individual project.
Denise, too, just one more bit about that. There is a section within the guidance document that does outline emissions from land use change, too.
Thanks, Allison. Yeah, that's true. And again, this is sort of meant to be guidance to apply to a lot of different scenarios and in all different kinds of situations. But if there is something specific based on the nature and location of a unique project, we're also available to help work through those kinds of challenges.
Thank you. Next, we have Alan Forsberg. Al, you can unmute.
Am I unmuted now?
Loud and clear.
Okay. and this may have been discussed earlier in the program. I didn't have audio for the first 15 minutes or so, but I'm wondering how you're handling the calculation of the net greenhouse gases. For instance, in a hospital project, a 920,000 square foot addition is like 21 acres. That's a huge amount. And I believe it was 120 beds. And you calculate in a very thorough way the greenhouse gas produced associated with that addition. But if you didn't do the project, those 120 beds would probably be provided in other places in other ways, maybe in a number of smaller additions, and the net effect of the project may actually be positive in the way of greenhouse gases. So is your process considering the net effect on greenhouse gases or only the effect of the new project?
So Allison, I'll let you respond to that in your example, but Alan, you know, again, the questions on the form allow for the opportunity to describe the project and assess the project, but they don't look at different scenarios about what projects didn't happen, right? And that's generally for all environmental review, not just related to this type of climate assessment.
Yeah, and thanks for that question, Alan. We were specifically looking just to capture an example greenhouse gas accounting for a project type, and recognizing that there's a lot of different variables that could go into that when you have a specific project. So we did not calculate, you know, what would be that offset if that project did not occur. I think based on the framework of an EAW today, you're not analyzing alternatives in that document. So if you were to go to an EIS, that would be the opportunity to potentially look at what those differences would be. And Denise, correct me if I'm misspeaking in there.
No, that's absolutely correct.
Great, thank you, Al. Our next question is from Joy Anderson. Joy, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, this is Joy Anderson from Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy. I wanted to comment that one concern that MCEA has, and I know it's not specifically relevant to the example that you showed, is the way that the draft guidance counts biogenic emissions. And this relates also to what Mr. Sjostrom was saying earlier. We are really concerned that that the way that biogenic emissions are being counted, both from burning biomass and then potentially from agriculture as well, is not going to be accurate in a way that actually conveys the real environmental effects that facilities will have. We want to make sure that there's a lot of scientific debate about this and how exactly biogenic methane should be counted and how exactly emissions from burning biomass should be counted. And we want to make sure that there's a really robust discussion about that and that we have looked at all viewpoints before we are deciding exactly how to count those. There's the OSB plant that's going to be built near Cohasset. We're putting in comments on that today. And they actually used the new guidance and showed that their factory was going to be a net carbon sink, even though it's cutting down 400,000 cords of wood each year. So we're really concerned that the guidance allows that to happen. We would hope that that's something that we can be discussed as this pilot project goes forward.
Thanks, Joy. That's an excellent comment. And again, we are not only looking at practicing the responses to the questions on the EAW form, but also trying out the guidance as they relate to how RGUs make a determination or decision to use that guidance. And that I could see, that sector specific guidance evolving over time to become more refined and more helpful but it just want to reiterate that EQB's role in this process is to create that sort of general guidance that applies to all the project types across the state, and that it is the RGU discretion and their expertise that will determine exactly what information is included on the form for each individual project. And so there is some flexibility and leeway to be evolving and growing and actually implementing those changes in real time.
Thank you. Marty, do you want to read another question out of the chat?
But of course. Also, Joy said, thanks, Denise. That's exactly what we're hoping for. We can use this time to refine the guidance, just as a follow-up. That was my fault. I muted Denise before she had time to reply verbally. So a comment or question from the chat is, having gone through greenhouse gas emission assessments for various EAW projects, one area I have struggled with is trying to estimate mobile source construction emissions. Are there any good resources for estimating these more mobile source emissions, e.g. based on building type, square footage, etc.?
So Allison, do you have any thoughts in your experience with this? Again, our guidance talks about how to do that in a general way, and also offers resources that we know of right now. But again, we're looking to always include that. And one of the things that we can do, for anyone who's registered as a participant in the pilot program, who's a governmental unit or a consultant, directly after this meeting, we're going to be having a cohort meeting, right? People who are going to, potentially go through the process, or who are going through the process, where we can answer these more technical questions. And so I encourage you to, to save those technical questions if you're planning to attend the cohort meeting. But if you're not, and you just have these types of technical questions, feel free to jump in and ask them like this. But again, for the best of our knowledge, the current guidance, the way it's constructed, anticipated those types of emissions. But Allison, do you have anything that you would like to sort of jump on with that question?
Sure. Yeah, I think, the mobile source construction equipment, I think the trickiest part of it is really determining, what sources you are planning to have. And, even just getting down to the nitty-gritty of, how many backhoes, how many, haul trucks, things like that. And I, for this example, relied heavily on the EPA emission factor hub for kind of their default factor for construction equipment. I know there are some other tools out there that have outlined some mobile source combustion tools and equations. And then I know that the EPA has their MOVES tool that also might be helpful.
Hi, this is Rachel. I'm sitting here with Allison in the same room. One of the challenges that we understand and came up on one of the previous questions is trying to figure out, that level of detailed information for the project where you might not otherwise have an exact construction contractor engaged yet. So, I mean, there's some things you could do, like if there's a construction estimate at least, and saying if somebody said it's going to cost $1 million to build X, well, what was the basis for that? Somebody had to assume a certain amount of equipment and what those pieces of equipment might be, and we could use that as the basis to run calculations. Or if a project is further along and knows, has a good idea of what those mobile sources might be, then it's a little bit more straightforward. But I'd echo Allison's comment that the challenging part is really getting that level of information where we might not have otherwise been collecting that for environmental review or permitting purposes.
Great question, thank you. So I'm gonna take the controls back here, and we have one final slide to show. So I just want to thank everyone for participating today. More information about the pilot program can be found on the EQB webpage, and the recording of this meeting will also be there. If you have further questions and comments, feel free to get in touch with us. Marty maybe Marty can put my email address into the chat. Feel free to reach out to us. Stay tuned for March. Communications should be coming out soon, probably next week. And get ready, cohort folks, for the meeting starting at 10.
So Yasmin, can I jump in and just say, you know, for all of you who are attending who are registered for the pilot program, and that includes governmental units, state and local governmental units, and consultants, that you were emailed a link to participate in that meeting. And so I would encourage you to you know, now we'll be starting that meeting fairly soon. So feel free to jump from this meeting over to that meeting. For everyone else that participated today, thank you so much for your interest in this project. We look forward to working with you as we go along in the process and to help provide meaningful feedback to the board based on your experiences in how you engage with the revised draft EAW form. We will be, as we go through the process, as projects come through the, they will be noticed in the EQB monitor. So please be watching for those. We'll be noting those in the EQB monitor with a star next to the title. So you'll be able to evaluate those EAWs and make sure that they provide the usable information about the climate effects that you're looking for. So thank you all.
Thanks, Denise, and thank you, Allison and Rachel. This was really interesting information with good discussion, and we will see the cohort folks over at the cohort meeting. So thank you all. Take care.